Hello, and welcome to this, our 94th live stream, a divinely inspired live stream, or so we can dream. This is, of course, an allusion to our Monday video on the doctrine of a divine inspiration. And if you haven't checked that out yet, please go take a look at that Monday release, because it's actually pretty good. So anyway, this is our weekly live stream where we take your questions on ancient Egypt and the Bible. We're glad you all showed up tonight, and we are going to do what we always do here, which is every Friday we take your questions on ancient Egypt and the Bible. And the rules are the same as always. Super chats have priorities, but we do take some non-super chats too. If you want to ask a question without paying a super chat, that's fine. We ask that you only post that once, that you put a Q and a colon in front of the question so I know that it's being addressed to me directly because I scan the live chat for that. And if it happens to be concerning a Bible verse or a piece of the ancient languages, give me a little context. For a Bible verse, do give me the book, chapter, and verse. And if it's a language, please tell me what language it's in and what you think it means, just to give me a little bit of context. Okay? So anyway, those are the ground rules. And we're going to get right into the questions here. And I think we're starting off with 6 non-super chats today. So, I see something right here. Dr. Falk, laugh always makes me smile. This also, we also should let you all guys know, we're trying a new technology here. Our chatting software from last week didn't work so well. So we're trying something different. So if we have a few technical difficulties, please be understanding. All right, let's get right into the non-super chats. Our first non-super chat here is from Bonbon. And he asks, can you briefly describe what the most important cult deity was during each kingdom period? And more importantly, why certain deities lost and gained prominence? Some, like Amun-Ra, popped out of nowhere. Okay, it's actually a really great question. So this is a really, really great question. Now, it's easier to actually answer the second question, because some deities gained prominence because they were part of a royal cult. And when they were part of a royal cult, they had financing, money. Amazing how that works, how religions seem to thrive a lot more when they got deep pockets. And it's no less true for ancient Egypt. Now, the most popular cults in Egypt through all kingdom periods were the cults of Hathor and the cults of Thoth. They were always the most popular cults through all periods of ancient Egypt. But there were some that sort of risen and fall kind of more along what we would say the more royal cults. And these tended to change over time. During the Old Kingdom, the cult of Re or Atum-Re was very, very popular. During the Middle Kingdom, the cult of Osiris at Abydos was particularly important to the kings of Dynasty 12. So that was probably the cult par excellence during the Middle Kingdom, was the cult of Osiris. During the New Kingdom, it was the cult of Amun-Ra. And this is where we sort of have to draw what the differences are here. Okay? Some of this is just plain based upon geography and where the kings have their sort of seats of power. For the kings of the Old Kingdom, their seat of power is in Memphis. So they are very, very closely aligned with the cult center at Heliopolis. This is where Atum-Ra had his cult center. In the case of, say, the New Kingdom, the cult of Amun-Ra is based in Thebes. And we find the first signs of the cult of Amun-Ra in the Dynasty 11 and 12. With say the mortuary, or sorry, the bark chapel of Senwosret I. So a lot of these are going to depend upon what king is patronizing what gods at what time. And then you have that little blip in the middle of the New Kingdom when Akhenaten and the Amarna kings have their sort of loyalty to the Aten, the sun disk. And then you get into the late period where, Amun-Re is still popular, but we start seeing the rise of the Memphite theology, the cult of the creator god Ptah. And he has a good run during the Third Intermediate period. And then finally you get to sort of the Ptolemaic period, and at that point you start seeing Hellenized deities sort of take hold, like the cult of Serapis, which was Osiris Apis. You also find the ascendancy of the cults of Isis and Hippocrates, Horus the sun. So there are definitely currents of say Egyptian cults that are particularly popular at certain times and not others. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the question. It's an interesting question. A little hard to map out sometimes, but still an interesting question. All right, our next non-super chat here is from Bonbon again. And we don't normally take two non-super chats from the same person in a row, but this one was interesting, okay? Do tomb robberies imply that the Egyptians at one point weren't as pious or religious as before because they were destroying the passage to the afterlife of pharaohs who thought of as deity for their beliefs? Okay. It's a good question. It's a very, very good question. And actually, there's almost two questions wrapped up into this. So it's a bit of a complex question. The thought that pharaohs were deity, that really doesn't come into play until Amenhotep III of Dynasty 18. So up until that point, the kings of Egypt were really more gods in potential than living gods. It's only after Amenhotep III's reign that they start being identified as living gods, as living deity, and then only until the end of Dynasty 20. And then after that, they're kind of just seen as like mortal men who become godlike through their divine kingship. Okay, so there wasn't that sort of belief prior to Dynasty 18. Now, on the other hand, tomb robberies go way back. We have evidence of tomb robberies going back as early as Dynasty 2. So the whole process of building tombs almost fostered that cottage industry of tomb robbery. So the same people who were building these tombs were also robbing these tombs.
Remember that one told they were building.
Oh yes. My producer here reminded me of the tomb robbery of Senwosret III, where part of the family is building the tomb, while relatives of the tomb builders are building a second shaft going around the tomb to break into the tomb immediately after the tomb is closed. So this was very common. This was exceptionally common. And it had nothing to do with piety. It had nothing to do with piety. It had nothing to do with religious beliefs. It was more along the lines of, well, we got to get the materials for the next tomb. How are we going to get the materials for the next tomb? Because the king's not going to supply us with enough. Oh, we'll steal from the last tomb. Problem solved. And there was an economic incentive too. They could take a lot of that stuff, especially the metals, especially stuff like bronze, like the gold, the silver, the metals particularly. They could take the metals, they could melt them down, and they could resell them. And that provided more financing for the craftsmen there. So I think it's very important that to sort of to see this as not necessarily an impiety, but just sort of a matter of being practical. You know, they have to make tombs for the next guy. They've got to still put food on the table. They're going to find a way to do it. And one of the ways they did that is through tomb robbery. And we see this, as I said, going all the way back to the tombs built at el-Kab at Abydos, second dynasty. So it's all through the history of Egypt. All through the history of Egypt. So anyway, thank you for the question. I hope that answered the question. And it was an interesting question. Okay, our next question here is from Wolf, and he asks, what is the oldest fraction of a text of the Torah that we have today? Okay. Great question. It comes from the Ketef Hinnom scrolls that date to the 7th century BC. And particularly Ketef Hinnom 2 has a selection of the Aaronic blessing from number 6, 24 to 26. It's slightly edited, but it is definitely identifiable as the Aaronic blessing. And that comes, as I say, directly from the Book of Numbers. So that is the oldest piece of text of the Torah that we have. And it's definitely Torah, and it's definitely First Temple period. And there's really, really no question about this. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the question. Very much appreciated. Our next question here is from Courtney Thompson. And he says, in a previous videos, you have argued that Amraphel is Hammurabi. Yes, I have. What are the alternatives to this position, and why has such an identification been rejected by most modern scholars? Okay, two reasons. There's two reasons. One is a linguistic reason, and the other reason is a chronological reason. And sometimes both liberal and conservative scholars will resort to both of these reasons. Okay. Now, the linguistic reason is that you begin with a in the case of Hammurabi, a hey. Looking up something here, just make sure I get this right. Okay, Amraphel, I believe that begins with an ayin. Let me just make sure it does. No, it begins with an aleph. Okay. Okay. The whole idea that it begins with an aleph, there is a linguistic debate here over whether Amraphel can be converted to a hey or a hate in the case of Hammurabi. So, now, we do have actually some evidence of a beginning glottal character, which is an aleph or an ayin, converting to a h of some kind. We see this, for example, we see in the Sinai texts, Hebeded. Okay, Hebeded. He was an administrator. He's a Semitic, Amorite Semitic administrator who worked in the Middle Kingdom. His name comes from Eved, meaning servant. So there's a glottal character at the beginning of his name in Semitic languages, but that does get also converted to an H. Likewise, we also see this in the Ugaritic texts, where Akkadian words beginning with a H come into language and are converted to words that have a glottal character at the beginning. So, I don't think the linguistic argument here holds much water, even though it is often used. The more sort of critical argument here is one of history. Now, in the case of conservative scholars, a lot of them are going to take, say, the idea that basically a very, very literalistic reading of biblical chronology. And they're going to take that literalistic reading of biblical chronology and basically say that Abraham did not live until 2000 BC, roughly. Whereas Hammurabi is around 1725 BC. That's a 300-year difference. So a lot of both liberal, who want to double down on, say, a literalistic interpretation of the Bible, plus conservative scholarship, who want to double down on the same thing, are both going to agree in that the chronology of Amraphel being Hammurabi is incongruent with known history. However, okay, and this is the big however, we also have a lot of evidence for Abraham's father, Terah. And he left us a lot of letters, and they do date to the early 18th century BC, particularly the reign of Zimri-Lim of Mari. So if Terah is still alive during the reign of Hammurabi, then it stands to reason that Abraham is also alive during the reign of Hammurabi. So I think the historical argument is not very good. So anyway, that's the reasoning here that they will typically use. They'll use a linguistic argument that I don't think holds water. And I think the chronological argument also doesn't make sense when you get right down to it. So anyway, thank you very much for the question, and I hope that helped. Our next question here is from Jack Ray, and he asks, was mustard a common food seasoning in ancient Egypt? And the answer to this is yes. The Egyptians did use mustard. And I forget what the word of it was. Let me just quickly look that one up, because I do know that they actually had mustard. And it was actually a fairly common plant in ancient Egypt. Just take me a second here to give you the name of it here. And I'm referencing a book here called, I think it's called The Ancient Egyptian Herbal, but I'll give you the correct title of it in just a moment here. Once the hamsters spin up my NAS. Go, you hamsters, go, go, go! Such slow hamsters. All right, here we go. Okay. This book, which I highly recommend, it's called An Ancient Egyptian Herbal by Lisa Maniche. Manniche. And it's published in cooperation with British University Press and the University of Texas, Austin. It's a great little book. And you will find that mustard is Manniche. And you'll find on page 148 here, white mustard. And it is called in the Egyptian Kelten. Keltem. And it was used frequently in Egypt. So they did have white mustard. And as well as many, many other herbs and spices as well. No, they didn't have ketchup. No ketchup. Ketchup won't happen until the 19th century. But that's a great little book. An Ancient Egyptian Herbal. Great little book. Okay. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. It's a great question. And frankly, they used spices all over the place in all sorts of different food. They put it in beer. So a lot of their beer was spiced. So they didn't have hops, but they would use spicing, extra spices to flavor their beer. So it provides some very unique flavors to their beer. So anyway, thank you very much for the question, and I hope that helped. Okay, the next final non-super chat here is from AEIUNO. Okay. And he says, hi, Dr. Falk. Well, hello. 2 questions, and I'm only going to answer one of the 2. Regarding the Uraeus, Excellent. For those who don't know, the Uraeus is the serpent amulet that often sits on the top of chests, on sacred furniture, and in the amulet on the top of the forehead of the king of Egypt. So if you look at the mask of the King Tut, you'll see a Uraeus on top of that. Okay, so that's what the Uraeus is. It's the cobra. It's a cobra goddess. And he asks, what are, or she, I don't know which it is, what are the round, sometimes oval shapes, sometimes seen on the heads of Uraeus depictions? Sun discs, maybe, and do they symbolize anything? Yes, they do. They're solar discs. They're essentially representing the power of the sun. And one of the things we have to understand about the Uraeus is they are a kind of a manifestation of solar deity. So what they're doing is, because they're solar deities and they have that representation of the sun on them, they protect sacred furniture by blasting out a death ray of heat. And that's sort of what they did to protect sacred space. So they are definitely a manifestation of solar deity. And that's what you're seeing with that representation of the solar disk on the Uraeus head, is that sort of symbolism of solar deity and the burning power of the sun, of fire. Okay? So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the question. It's a great, great question. Okay, I think we're on to the super chats. Historical strategy gaming, death ray cobras. Yep, death ray cobras. That's it. They are so cool. Okay, our first super chat here is from Algot Robertson for 50 Swedish kroners. Thank you very much for the super chat. Our church crisis. How do we know that we have the right interpretation and not being to our will or desire? Any good book on this subject? Wow, that is a great question, and I think more people need to ask that question. The fact is that one of the things I would really, really stress about getting the right interpretation is to not be beholden to our church traditions. It's really, really easy to, say, be completely beholden to our church traditions, to a theologians we really like Calvin, Luther, church fathers. We have to understand that none of these people, not Calvin, not Luther, not, say, the popes, not the church fathers, wrote in the same context or time as the biblical texts. So knowing that, you really always have to go back to the Bible in its original context. And that's what I think is really important here is, you may never always get all the interpretations right. But if you start with the idea of trying to go back to the Bible's original context, you're always going to do better than when you try to interpret the Bible based on traditions. So I think this is a really, really important point to make, that all of this is going to depend upon reading the Bible in its original ancient Near Eastern context. Whether it's the Old Testament or the New Testament, they're both dependent on an ancient Near Eastern context. So you got to go back to the context, the historical context, the context of the vocabulary, the context of the passage. And there's many contexts. It's not just one context. You got the genre context. That's another context again. So you're dealing here with 7 or 8 different kinds of contexts for every biblical passage. So you always have to go back to the passage to sort of untangle the meaning of the text. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat and very much appreciate the support. Our next super chat here is from Algot Robinson again for 20 Swedish kroners. Thank you very much for the super chat. How do we know that the Bible is inspired by God? Well, I'm not sure we could know it. but we can believe it. One of the things about the inspiration of the biblical texts is it's the Holy Spirit that tells us it's inspired. Okay. Now, one of the interesting things about the life of Jesus, and when he talks in parables, and this is a very interesting note about parables. And I know it sounds like a little bit of a tangent here, but bear with me for a moment. When Jesus gave the parables, he told his disciples that if you don't believe, you won't understand the parables. The parables were meant to obscure the message of the kingdom of God to those who did not understand. So those who do not understand would not understand the parables. Whereas if you were already being touched by the Holy Spirit, you would understand the parables. In knowing that the Bible is inspired is a little bit like that, where the Holy Spirit basically reveals, and this was the position of the Church Fathers, was that the Holy Spirit revealed these texts to be inspired. And therefore, these texts became accepted by the widespread Christian community. So it was more along the lines of that the Bible doesn't prove the texts are inspired, but the circulation and the acceptance of the text through the mission of the Holy Spirit demonstrated that they were inspired. So there is a lot there that's sort of wrapped up in the whole idea of pneumatology, the study of the Holy Spirit. We see this all through the book of Acts, where the Holy Spirit was said to have taught, illuminated, guided, instructed. You want to see the Holy Spirit run rampant through a book of the Bible? Read the book of Acts. It really shouldn't be called the Acts of the Apostles. It really should be called the Acts of the Holy Spirit. Because you just read it everywhere through the book of Acts, where the Holy Spirit did this, and the Holy Spirit did that, and the Holy Spirit did this thing too. That's really what's going on in the book of Acts. So, when it came down to the actual recognition of the canon, it wasn't so much that the early church was deciding what books were canonical and which weren't. They were pretty much basically debating about what has the Holy Spirit already has decided is canonical. And a lot of that is from, well, is the book internally consistent? Did it disqualify itself? Does it have universal recognition across the apostolic sees? There's a lot of factors that went into this.
So while it's Holy Spirit inspired,
Mm-hmm.
it is based on logical proofs.
Yeah, there was criteria to the recognition of the inspiration of the various books of the Bible. Definitely, there was definite criteria. There's no doubt about that there was criteria. However, that criteria was entirely based upon the idea that the Holy Spirit enlightened the church to recognize these as inspired. So as I said, it was less that they were picking books, other than they were already recognizing that these books were inspired. So anyway, I hope that sort of clarifies the matter. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. The next one here is from Algot Robertson again for 50 Swedish kroners. And he asks, how does the Bible define modesty? Ooh, great question. Many of my Christian friends uses modesty from today's cultural standpoint. Okay. Yeah. That's a really, really great question. And in some ways, it's difficult to answer. And the reason why it's difficult to answer is because there is a cultural standpoint for this. There's definitely a cultural standpoint. Now, I don't think you could take today's modesty standards and graft them onto the Bible. I think that would be wrong. But in their own day, they did have their own form of say, cultural modesty, such as hair coverings in certain cases for, say, women. And those are seen to be particular to the cultural context and not universals. So the whole idea of modesty tends to be one more of, is your behavior, mode of dress, appearance, ornamentation, is that more consistent with the cultural values of a Christian lifestyle? So that's really seems to be what it's more driving at. Basically one of the things the Bible says is, don't put your focus on, say, jewelry and ornamentation. Don't go overboard. It doesn't say don't wear it. It just says don't go overboard. Because sometimes this is just, say, the gratuitous flaunting of wealth. Okay? That's immodest. If you're going to communion and you're decked out in a $10,000 Armani suit as a man, maybe that's immodest. There's several ways to be immodest. By the, as I said, for the example, the consumptuous display of wealth could be seen as immodest. Revealing too much skin could be seen as immodest. So a lot of this is going to depend on context and circumstances. And the Bible doesn't so much define this as much sets out principles for it. Like, for example, one of the things the Bible does say is don't look down the poor because they're your brother. There's a way to be immodest that looks down totally on the poor. So, again, there's a lot of different approaches you can take to this. You can take the idea of sexuality as being a potential vector for immodesty. You can take wealth as a potential vector for immodesty. There's many ways you can look at this. So, I wouldn't say there's just one definition of this, but as I said, it's a general principle thing. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I hope that provides some food for thought. Thank you very much for the support and a great question. Our next super chat here is from Algot Robertson again for 20 Swedish kroners. Thank you very much for the super chat. Exodus 28:28. Why are not priestly garments like this? Well, let's pull up the Bible and find out what is being said here. Pull up the Bible here. Got Exodus. (28). Okay, and the verse says, "And they shall bind the breastplate by its rings to the rings of the ephod with a blue cord, that it may be on the skillfully woven band of the ephod, and the breastplate may not come loose from the ephod." And let's see, is there anything before that? I was just talking about the ephod here. And Aaron shall carry the names of the sons of Israel in the breastplate of judgment over his heart, and he enters into the holy place for a memorial before the Lord continually. Okay. Now, there are two ways that the priestly garments do try to protect against immodesty. Okay, so I believe this question, super chat here, is following on the previous one. One of the things is that much of the garments are very symbolically important. So this is not the consumptuous display of wealth, because the high priest didn't keep any of these items. These are not his items. He only used these items while he was high priest. The other thing is that there were garments on the high priest that the high priest had to wear to prevent accidentally exposing himself to, say, like the temple of the altar, like the altar of the Lord, so that his nakedness wouldn't accidentally show. Okay, so there were other parts of this too, that were more than just, say, the kilt and the breastplate and, say, the sash and the turban, etc. There were also garments here to prevent him being exposed, because that would have been seen as impious to, say, expose your loins to, say, an altar as you committed sacrifices. This is also one of the reasons why the Bible forbids the building of stairs or a ramp up to an altar, and that's to prevent the accidental exposure of nakedness. So there's two ways, as I said, in which the high priestly garments prevent immodesty. Okay? First of all, as I said, by not making these garments their personal garments. Okay, these are garments that are basically passed down. So it's not like the high priest ever gets to keep the ephod or any other of these items. They are sacred items. They are used year after year, century after century, millennium after millennium in the service of the temple. The other way, as I said, is just to, those little safeguards against immodest exposure of one's private parts. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I hope that helped, and I hope that explained it. Okay, our next super chat here is from Courtney Thompson for $2. Thank you very much for the super chat. What Egyptian neuter god most resembles Yahweh? Oh, that one's easy. The god Ptah, the Memphite god of creation. Now, the Memphite god of creation is very interesting. I mean, he's a very interesting guy. He's a mummy. He's bald. He's often portrayed with a blue lapis head. It's really an interesting look. But he's portrayed as a mummy. But he's a creation god. Now, why does he resemble Yahweh so much? And it comes down to the idea that Ptah could create with the force of his will and his voice. Fascinating, absolutely fascinating parallel to the god Yahweh. Like, for example, when Ptah decides to create something, he will speak it and it'll be. Just like Elohim in Genesis 1. Let there be light, and there was light. Ptah can also bring things about by the force of his will. Just by thinking it, he can make it happen. It's a very, very close parallel to Yahweh. So it's a fascinating comparison to compare Yahweh with Ptah, because the two, at least in their modes of creation, their methods of creation, are very, very similar. Now, there are differences. We've got to point that out, too. Yahweh was never created. He's an uncreated deity. He always existed. Whereas Ptah was self-created. Basically, Ptah thought himself into existence and came into existence. So there is a difference between the two. Also, Yahweh is an iconographic deity. He doesn't have a physical form, whereas, say, Ptah has the form of a mummy. So there are similarities and there are differences too, but I think of all the gods in Egypt, Ptah is the closest. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated, and I hope you found that interesting. Okay, the next super chat here is from Cataphract3 for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. And he asks, thoughts on the idea God had a corporeal body in the Old Testament like other ancient Near Eastern gods? Seems like a bit of wooden interpretation to me of verses like Isaiah 66:1. All right, let's pull up Isaiah 66:1. And we're going to go to Isaiah. And we are going to trace this through. We're going to trace this one through. And verse 1. Thus says the Lord, heaven is my throne, and the earth is my footstool. Where then is a house you could build for me? And where is a place that I may rest? Okay. Now, I think that's not so much talking about this. Now, this is talking about the vastness of God. What you probably meant, if I'm correct, is 6:1. So you might have gotten the verse wrong. Yes, okay, so Isaiah 6:1 is the verse most commonly used to suggest God had a body. Okay? So, and it says, in the year of King Uzziah's death, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, lofty and exalted, with the train of his robe filling the temple. Now, most exegetes are just going to say this is a robe. You are going to get some exegetes who say this is basically a depiction of the body of God. Particularly one by the name of Esslinger. Okay? Now, what Esslinger is going to say is he's going to look at that word robe. He's going to look at that robe. He's going to focus on that word robe. Okay? That robe, shul, it's not just a robe, it's the train of a robe. So essentially the sort of the garment behind the robe, the long extended garment. And what Esslinger is going to do is he's going to go down to Driver's commentary. And what Driver is going to say is that this is a robe, or it is a metaphor for, let's just say, female body parts. Okay? It's a metaphor for female body parts. And Esslinger is going to take that to the next level. He's going to take that not to say that this is a euphemism, like Driver did. I mean, Driver's basically going to say this is a euphemism. He's going to basically say that, well, women were covered in a robe and the train of the robe, and this is just a euphemism for female body parts. And by the way, when the Bible uses it in this way, it's never a flattering thing. It's never a flattering thing. It's meant to be a derogative metaphor, not a, say, positive metaphor. So it's not a good euphemism. It's a bad euphemism. But what Esslinger is going to do is basically stretch this beyond credibility. And basically saying that this term for robe can go beyond that. If it means this for a female body part, then it stands to reason that it's also representing the male sexual organs as well. And therefore, this verse is telling you that God had a body. So that's the argument here. That's the argument. And it all comes from Esslinger. Now, Esslinger is really the only guy who's, until very recently, who's claimed this. There's another theologian, which I won't mention, that also mentions this. But, this is where the idea comes from. It's really a distortion of anthropomorphic language. It's really what this is. It's basically taking something that would be better explained through anthropomorphic terms. Like, for example, in the Psalms, where it talks about God having wings and feathers. God's not a chicken. Those are a kind of metaphor. It's a metaphor. And this, too, is a kind of metaphor. It's analogical language. So I think it's very important to, when we look at a passage like this, not to take this in a wooden literal way, because that just leads to some very strange exegesis. So, and I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the super chat, and it's a great question. Okay, our next super chat here is from Tim Miura for 5 British pounds. Thank you very much for the super chat. In Genesis 2, 11 to 13, Cush, a land retrospectively named after Cush, the father of Havilah and Nimrod. Genesis 10, 7 to 9, implying Shinar, or is it somewhere else entirely? Why? Okay. Great question. Great question. And we'll just go right to Genesis 2. And 11 to 13. Okay. The name of the first was Pishon. It flows around the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold, and the gold of that land is good, and Bedlam and onyx stone are there. And the name of the second river is Gihon. It flows around the whole land of Cush. And the third name of the third river is Tigris. It flows east of Assyria, and the fourth river is the Euphrates. All right, great question. Here's one thing it isn't actually talking about is Cush. Okay, Cush here isn't Cush, and I'll explain that in a moment. Okay, we have actually talked about this before. This is one of those things where changes to the Hebrew language during, say, the Middle Hebrew period added a vowel where it shouldn't have been. Okay. Now we have in Hebrew a feature called a matrix, which is a kind of a consonant that's put into the text to substitute for a vowel. And this was sort of an early vowel system used in Hebrew. Now, in the case of Cush, there is a vav put in for that U sound, but it was the wrong verb, or sorry, the wrong vowel. The real vowel that should have been put in there was a yod, as in kish or gish. And this is actually a region in Mesopotamia. So what we have here, and for more information on this, I think Paul Lawrence touches on this. I think he touches on this. Okay, so what we have here is a misspelling caused by an updating of the language. One of the things we have to keep in mind is vowels are not inspired, even ones that are represented by consonants. It's the consonants, the main consonants, that are the inspired texts. So we have to look at that Kaf and Sheen and view this in terms of at least without its original vowels. And once we do that, we can easily see that what's being referred to here is Kish, which happens to be a region in Mesopotamia. Kish, also called Gish, is in Mesopotamia. Cush is unfortunately in, say, south of Egypt. And this does not refer to Cush, it refers to Kish. Small difference in vowel, big difference in meaning. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Okay. I think, if we're lucky here, okay, so you were trying to make it 66:1. Okay. Well, the thing is with Isaiah 66:1, it's usually not a passage used for referencing God having a body, but it is used for showing his immensity. So, the idea that God can fill the heavens, that the earth is just a meager footstool for him, does beg the question is, well, if God's that big, how can you build a house for him? You can't contain God. So, there is that idea, but it's typically not used for, say, what the super chat asked, which was about the body of God. So this is typically not a passage used for that, even though there is some anthropomorphic language here. Yeah, it does definitely argue for illocality. So I would agree with Patui here. So let's go on to the next super chat here, and I want to make sure here. Yeah. Okay, we're gonna go on to our There we go. Hoo-hoo, magic. Magic. Okay, our next super chat here is from Addison Weir for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. And he asks, do you agree with Heiser on the identities of the sons of God and the Nephilim in Genesis 6, 1-4? No, I don't. Now, having said that, I do agree with Heiser in some of his analyses of the sons of God. Like for Job. I absolutely agree that the sons of God in the book of Job are, say, the council of gods. I agree with him there. I don't agree with him on the sons of God and the Nephilim in Genesis 6, 1-4. But we're also looking at this from different points of view. Heiser is looking at this through Second Temple period literature, whereas I'm looking at this through Bronze Age literature. And the two are basically have different frameworks for this sorts of thing. Heiser is going to look at the sons of God as basically being divine entities that come down, mate with women, and produce these sort of demonic powers called the Nephilim. And when the Nephilim die, they become demons. Okay, I'm not going to take that view. I'm definitely not going to take that view. I more take the view that what we have with the sons of God and the daughters of men, so there's two groups here, is that these are priests, castes of priests who violate their vow. And there's a myth, there's a superstition that occurs in, say, the late Bronze Age, late and middle Bronze Ages, where if a priest has a sexual vow and it violates that vow, the offspring that's produced produces catastrophic results. And I think these are the Nephilim that are being talked about in Genesis 6, 1-4. I think that's a much more reasonable explanation given the context of the literature of the period. So while I do agree with Heiser on many of the respects of his Council of Gods theology, and even some of his interpretation of the sons of God, I don't agree with it as far as, say, the Pentateuch is concerned. But I do agree with it for, say, the later literature. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Addison Weir for $4.99 again. Thank you very much for the super chat. At this moment, you are all hearing the sound of Dr. Falk's voice. Well, you are kind of. I mean, whose voice are you listening to at this point? So yeah, you are hearing my voice right now. So it's true. Okay, his next super chat here for $1.99. Thank you for the super chat. This statement is false. Okay. Yeah. Hard to know what to say about that. Thank you for the super chat. And it goes on for another $1.99. Everything I write is false. Well, that's not strictly true. I mean, you did write a question. I mean, a question is true or false, can produce a true or false veridical value. Doesn't mean that the question itself is inherently false. So, no, not quite. But nice try. And then he goes on for $1.99. Again, thank you for the super chat. So about the things I sent you, wink. Uh-huh. And then finally, an actual question for $9.99. He asks, thought on Craig Bartholomew. Apparently he's aiming to provide the Old Testament counterpart to N.T. Wright's Christian Origins and the Question of God. I haven't read Bartholomew, so I'm going to have to plead ignorance here. But it does suggest that I should probably read him. But I just have not gotten to him yet. So, again, my reading list is just a mile long. I have so many people I need to read, and it's kind of... I just haven't had the time to do it. between my day job and doing this YouTube channel, it's like doing 2 full-time jobs. So I don't have the time to read that I used to have, but I try to slip in reading wherever I can. So I'll make it a point to look up Craig Bartholomew and start to get some reading on him done. So anyway, thank you for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Aston Weir for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Book idea. You should do for ABR what Ben Stanhope did for the Creation Museum. Ooh. Ooh. I got a lot of enemies already. And I got a huge number of them at ABR. If I did to ABR what Ben Stanhope did for the Creation Museum, wow, I would never be employable at a seminary ever again. Because the donors would never have it. Never have it. At this point, I'm just a pariah amongst those seminaries. But if I did something like that, I'd end up being excommunicated altogether. Okay, let's tackle that next one there. Asking Weir for $1.99. Say something that will get you canceled. Too late. Already happened. It's nothing more that I can say that can get me more canceled than I already am.
I think that seriously, that's proving false.
Well, yeah.
The falseness of their hit piece is being demonstrated.
Yeah. We are right now very much satisfied that the falseness of those hit pieces have been demonstrated. Finally demonstrated. You know, that they were those comments were taken out of context, that they were construed to mean the exact opposite of what we intended to say, and did say, because it was provable through the context.
McClellan had to come
you know,
and say that it was directed at the BBC.
That I mean, even McClellan had to admit it, that he misinterpreted my comments. So, you know, he still doubles down on his claims. You know, so, you know, there's, you know, the fact that he distorted what I said, distorted what I, you know, the positions of the various parties. It was completely, and I would advise people to take a look at our community tabs, where we show this happening in the, you know, these being demonstrated in the videos. So, you know, we're finally happy that there's some vindication happening here, although that does not undo the damage that these guys did. So moving on. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, the next super chat here is from Addison Weir for $4.99. Thank you for the super chat. Would not mind a collaboration between you and Ralph Hawkins. You guys are my go-to sources on the date of the Exodus. I'm actually friends with Ralph. He's a great guy. I have met him a couple times. I talked to him in, was it the San Diego conference of the Evangelical Theological Society. Great guy. Love him. And he's a great scholar too, and good archaeologist. So I absolutely, you know, I think he's fantastic, and I like his work too. And his work on, say, Israelite archaeology is really excellent, really excellent. So Nate, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it, and I'd love to do a collab with him someday. Okay, the next one here is from Aswir for $4.99. Thank you for the super chat. So, who's that dullard pharaoh you've had 2 weeks to remember? Ptolemy the 13th. There you go. He was the dullard.
Why was he?
He was the guy who started the civil war between for the throne of Egypt, between him and Cleopatra the Seventh. There were other parties that helped boost his his success. But ultimately, he was not that bright, he was not that wise, and his forces were ultimately destroyed by a combination of Cleopatra VII and Julius Caesar. So, he was kind of dumb. Historical gaming. Wasn't he a boy king? He was a teenager. He was in his teens. He was 13 when he came to the throne. So, he wasn't a child, but he was a really dumb teenager. Dumb teenager. Okay? So, he's probably the biggest dullard that ever took the throne of Egypt. And it showed. I mean, it really showed. I mean, his decisions were terrible. So anyway, I hope that answered the question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. All right, Astonware for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Do you think Awakening School of Theology would ever hire you, at least once the drama died down? I don't know. Okay. For those who don't know, the Awakening School of Theology is the school that was started by Michael Heiser, who, again, he's, for those who don't know, he's in 4th stage pancreatic cancer. He's not doing well. He is only expected to live days or weeks. Do pray for his family at this time. And his health is really deteriorated. And we are losing him way too soon. He's only 60. So way too young for someone like that to pass on. I don't know what his plans are for the school following his untimely demise. Okay. I mean, I'd actually love to join him there, to be honest. I'd love to teach at that school. I would actually absolutely relish that opportunity. If I ever had the opportunity to teach there, I'd take that in a heartbeat. Because, it would be a golden opportunity to carry on Heiser's legacy. Oh yeah, I'd do that. That's a no-brainer.
It's a school that's actually dedicated to the
the principles of that school are everything I believe in. Even though I disagree with Heiser on some specifics, I believe fervently in reading the Bible in not just its historical context, but all its contexts. Its literary context, its grammatical context, its genre context, its lexicographical contexts. I think he had the right idea of how we should be reading the Bible and studying it effectively. And I think those are lessons that can easily be taught to anyone. And then that's sort of the principle that I used here when I started this channel, was to get people to start really, really appreciating the Bible in its context. In its ancient Near Eastern context, its historical context. I want people to really sort of not just get a grasp of the Bible, but to really become excited about it. So any sort of scholastic environment where those principles are extolled, I'd love to teach there. And from the looks of it, Awakening School of Theology is one of those institutions. So absolutely, I would join that school in a heartbeat. Now, on the other hand, I see historical strategy gaming here. See if I can. It hasn't come up yet. Just one more here. Come on. It's being a little slow here. Historical strategy gaming says start your own school. School or museum. Okay. Starting your own school is actually really, really difficult. Oh, did it come up? There it is. There it is. All right. Historical gaming says start your own school. Where is it? A museum. And 1000 Clever Boy says, that takes a lot of money and donors. It does. It takes a lot of money. It takes a lot of donors. It takes a lot of time, and it takes extraordinary organizational and skills. You have to deal with just about everything when you start your own school. Okay, it's really, really difficult. You have to get a piece of land somewhere. You need an endowment of some kind to keep the school going during the lean years. Very difficult to do. It takes incredible financial acumen to do that. You have to organize personnel. At first you're only going to be able to hire adjuncts, contract teachers, and that's going to put stress on your teaching staff. Incredible stress. I have a friend right now who's really trying to start his own school, and he's been doing this now for 8 years. Okay, 8 years. And he's been more successful than most who have tried to start their own schools, but he's understanding how difficult this is and how many problems are involved. It's extremely, extremely difficult to start a college. Okay? Extremely difficult. And unless you have the right personality to do this, it's almost guaranteed to fail. Okay. Now I understand I'm good at teaching. I would be a great academic dean. I could organize, say, other instructors. No problem. Organizing, basically starting a school, is more of a salesperson's job. You have to be a real salesman. You have to be able to inspire people with your vision and invest in it. Those are skills I lack. And I know I lack those skills. So for me, starting my own school would not do very well. Because I don't have the gift of the gab. I just don't. So, while you can inspire students, I can inspire other people to come along with us and partner with us to share in that vision. Doing your own school, takes that to a whole another level, and it's a very, very difficult thing to achieve. So that's why I will never start my own school. But I have no problem, if someone else has already started a school, joining them and helping their vision grow. No problem with that at all. So I would love to be part of Michael Heiser's Awakening School of Theology. Love that. That'd be just that'd be a dream come true. So anyway, thank you very much for that super chat. I very much appreciate it. And where were we here? Mr. Empty Conjecture for marketing. Yeah, Mr. Empty Conjecture has the personality to pull that off. I'm not sure I do. Okay. So anyway, thank you for that super chat. Very much appreciated. Our next super chat here is from Aston Weird for $4.99. Thank you for the super chat. From a biblical standpoint, what does it mean to be human? Great question. There is a lot of ways you can answer this question. You can take, say, the Westminster Confession's view of this. And the Westminster Confession is the sole purpose of man is to know God and enjoy him forever. There are other biblical answers to this too. But that's a great starting point. To know God, and that's a statement that's resonates from Ecclesiastes, which is, remember your Creator in the days when you are young, and he'll be your hope under the sun. So that comes from the book of Ecclesiastes. But there's other ways to answer this too, which is we are imagers of God. Per Genesis 1, where the whole idea to be human is to be, say, the images of God. We are bodies formed to contain the likeness and the image of God. So in that respect, then, to be human is to be more godlike. We're this sort of strange mix of matter and energy and spirit. We're not just, say, lumps of meat. There's more to humanity than just the meat. There's a soul that sort of becomes dynamically generated, through our life. And that displays the outward quality, that displays the qualities of God to those around us. Should we decide to make God a part of our lives. So there's a very, very important key there, which is the whole purpose of man is to reflect God. We're mirrors. We're essentially mirrors. We're mirrors that are intended to show God to everyone, or Jesus Christ. The New Testament says we are being conformed daily to the image of his Son, Jesus Christ. So we are to reflect Jesus in everything we do. So from a biblical standpoint, that's what it means to be human. Is to be more God-like, more Christ-like, more like his image to the world. So that's what I think is what it means to be human. Is to more and more every day get closer and closer and closer to reflecting the image of our Creator. So anyway, I hope that helps. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate it. It's a difficult question, and there's many answers you could take with this, but that's what sort of pops up to my mind right now. So anyway, thank you for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. Addison Weir from 199. Thank you for the super chat. Best atheist agnostic scholar on the Old Testament. Ooh, good question. William Prop is pretty good. I'll give him that. He's definitely a agnostic, at least, if not a full atheist. But I think William Prop is quite good. Let's see, who else? I have actually gotten some benefit out of some of the more critical scholars too. Like example would be Von Rad. I've actually seen some good insights in Von Rad. Now Von Rad can be some pretty strange stuff too. Okay, so I'm not gonna go that far, but he can have some insights at times that I've used in some of my work. But I think Prop is probably better, to be honest. So that's sort of who I would pick here as far as my choice for best atheist agnostic scholar is William Prop. So that's just off the top of my head. So I thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Aston Weir for $4.99. I wonder how Kip would react if you popcorn reviewed one of his videos. Oh, I don't think there's any need to wonder. I think it's pretty obvious how he would react. He'd just sort of go right into the ad hominem attacks. Essentially, he would just go straight into ad hominem attacks. He would basically also use professional hedge protection. So it's going to go along some lines, something like this. He's not an expert in the field. He doesn't have his PhD in Old Testament studies. He doesn't have a voice or an opinion, and his opinion is qualified. And it'll be something like that, because that's his typical MO, is to try to create an elitism.
Went to University of Manchester, so he knows what the university.
Yes, he does know that my credentials have some real street cred, but that won't prevent him. Knowing that my credentials have street cred won't prevent him from doing the ad hominem attacks, because as I said, that's always what he does. Is he puts up the professional hedge protection, the stay in your lane stuff, the trying to show through more personal attacks and derisionary comments that his opponents don't have, aren't qualified, and it's just the same old stuff. It's just the same old stuff.
I'm not going to point out Manchester.
No, I'm not going to point it out. I mean, Manchester is a top 200 school as far as biblical studies go. It's not the highest school, not in any stretch of the imagination. Whereas Liverpool for Egyptology was like the top school. So, and Kip knows that. It's just that, it's always going to boil down to the ad hominem attacks for him. That's how he always reacts when he's challenged. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Billy Ningen for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Good evening, Dr. Falk. Could we assess the 40-year wandering period using Dynasty 19 Egyptian calendar? God bless. Okay. Yeah, to some extent, absolutely we could. We do. There is certain things here that could suggest a 40-year wandering, or at least something close. Maybe 38 years, maybe 42. The exact number of the wandering doesn't have to be exact here. Because it is using that euphemistic 40 years, that idiomatic 40 years. Now, because it is using that idiomatic 40 years, and it's not precise, as long as you get sort of a long period of time in there, you're probably going to get pretty close. Now, the Exodus takes place sometime around 1265 BC. At least if we use as our starting point here the death of Amenhotep, the firstborn son of Ramses II. Now, that's not to say that the Exodus took place during 1265, but it is suggestive. It could have actually been one of his sons after that. That could have been, say, the next crown prince that ended up dying. Okay, but it didn't happen any earlier than 1265-ish. Plus or minus 7 years. Now, with that said, however, you add 40 years to 1265, you get 1225. Okay, that's a reasonable time for the Israelites to enter into the land of Canaan. They take 5 years to pacify the major cities. And that's what the text is basically indicating. It takes them 5 years to pacify the major cities, like Jericho, like Ai, Bethel, and Hatzor. So that takes them a good long time, 5 years just to do that. To also defeat the cities in the Heshbon as well. So there's a lot of suppression of the major powers that they have to do during those first 5 years. And then they have to go to Shiloh, where they squabble over the territorial divisions for another 2 years. Okay. So you're at this point at 1218 BC. 1218 BC. The Merneptah victory stela, which mentioned Israel, is written in 1217 BC. And it was during the first 4 years of Merneptah's reign that he would have entered into Canaan and campaigned. So he would have entered in there sometime between 1221 and 1218. So all of this fits really, it fits really well with Egyptian chronology. Really, really well with Egyptian chronology. So you don't have to have an exact 40-year wandering. But if you had an exact 40-year wandering, and knowing that the Exodus took place in 1265 or somewhere around there, works exceptionally well. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate it. Okay, the next super chat here is from Billy Ningen for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. And he says, some scholars, including both legitimate and pseudo-scholars, assert that Egyptians made their way to America. Oh boy. Oh boy. Do we have any material culture that supports this claim? God bless. Well, God bless you too. And thank you for the super chat. No. We have nothing here. Absolutely nothing that would support this claim. Now, every now and then you hear a fraudulent claim that tries to support this. Like, for example, you do get that fraudulent claim of hieroglyphs that were built in this, that were written in this park in Australia. And they were totally discredited, completely discredited. But that doesn't prevent people from still bringing them out from, I think they're called the Goslin glyphs or something like that. Yeah, they're totally fraudulent. But it doesn't prevent people from bringing up fraudulent claims like this. So, I have seen no evidence at all that the Egyptians ever made it to America. Now, the Egyptians did get around. Okay? They did get around. One place they got around to was Spain. At least the trade goods got as far as Spain. If you could at least say there was trade goods in America that came from Egypt, yeah, you might be able to have some claim to this. Even secondhand. But, like, for example, we find scarabs, Egyptian scarabs, in, say, the west coast of Spain. Now, we don't think that the Egyptians themselves made it to Spain, but that their goods were passed along, ultimately ending up in Spain. But we have nothing in America that would at all indicate that either the Egyptians or their trade goods made it to North America. So I don't think we're dealing here with no evidence at all. No evidence at all for the Egyptians traveling to America. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it, and I hope that answered your question. Angel WVM for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. And he says, "Hi, Dr. Falk. I hope all's well." Well, thank you. Things are a lot better this week. We're doing pretty good. So thank you for the well wishes. It's very much appreciated, and we do appreciate your support of this channel. Did you ever make a video of evidence for child sacrifice in Canaan? Thank you for all your help. Well, my pleasure. Now, we don't have... I did make a short on child sacrifice in Canaan. I haven't made a long video on child sacrifice, and I really should, because there's actually some really good evidence and some really great pictures that I'd love to throw into that. Most of our evidence for child sacrifice in Canaan actually comes from Egypt, of all places. Now, we do have, of course, the biblical text, and the biblical text is evidence, and it gives us a lot of stuff, a lot of evidence for child sacrifice, particularly the Tophets. But it always had been a question in the minds of scholars of, well, is that propaganda from the Israelites, and were the Canaanites really sacrificing children? Well, it turns out that they did. And I think the evidence at this point is pretty convincing. We do, for example, like at the Ramesseum, have a image of, I think it's the king of Gaza, who's basically dangling his son over the side of the wall and slitting his throat. That's pretty good evidence for child sacrifice right there. And we do know that the Canaanite kings would sacrifice their children during times of distress. But we also have the Tophets too. Probably the most important excavation of a Tophet happened at Carthage, where you have all these little urns with little child skeletons in it. Burnt, charred child skeletons. Horrifying. Horrifying. And there's like, I think it was 140 of these little jars. So it wasn't something that happened a lot, but it happened enough. Yeah. We do have to keep in mind too that say the God of Israel basically commanded the Israelites, do not make your son pass through the fire. In short, don't turn them into child sacrifices. This didn't prevent some Israelites from doing it nevertheless, but it was a forbidden practice in Israel. And prophets were an abomination. And but the the Bible calls this toivo, abomination. It was seen as the most horrifying of acts. So it is something I do need to make a video on, a full video on, and it's something I can't really adequately cover here through just a 3-minute super chat. But yeah, it's a good idea, and we will probably go ahead and do a video on this because I think it's really, really important. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated, and I hope that at least provided some insight into this. Tom Wanchek for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. What do you make of the Crusades? Cruel and reckless by Christians or justified defense of the Holy Land? Also, ever consider growing your Twitter presence? Let me answer that last question first. I have not so much considered growing my Twitter presence. I don't find that Twitter is a very good platform for the kind of work I do. Now, I am on Twitter. I do Twitter. I don't do a lot on Twitter. I more read Twitter than I actually post on Twitter. I don't find 180 characters all that great for communicating much of anything meaningful. So for me right now, I'm more focused on. YouTube's my main outlet for social media. My second sort of main outlet is TikTok. The shorts that I do here on YouTube, we've been posting on TikTok, and they've done okay there. Those shorts have done actually okay on TikTok. So at this point, we're more interested in growing TikTok just because we get cross-fertilization between this and YouTube. So, I'm not a great fan of Twitter. I have on Twitter. I use Twitter. I don't terribly like Twitter. Other than that, I would rather put my efforts more into, say, growing our community here on YouTube, which is usually through Discord. So we do a lot on Discord. So that's sort of our main social media outlets is YouTube and Discord. And then in third place, TikTok. Twitter, distant fourth. Very, very distant fourth. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Oh, wait, didn't answer the question. What do you make of the Crusades? Almost went too fast there. Crusades are an interesting historical problem. On one hand, they're definitely invited. Okay? The problem with the Crusades is a lot of it came down to bureaucracy. Now, when the Crusaders, we have to understand that the Emperor of Constantinople, of the Eastern Roman Empire, sent a plea to Rome for military support. Really financial support. So they were asking the papacy to provide money to fund their war against Islam. Now, we have to kind of understand that at the time, it's still today, actually, the gears of the bureaucracy of the Roman Catholic Church move slowly. The papacy in Rome debated this 17 years before making a call to action. Okay? Really, really slow deciding. Okay. After 17 years had passed, the emperor at Constantinople had forgotten even that the letter had been sent out. They had no idea. I mean, they wanted money. They wanted money. That's what they wanted out of the West. What the West sent them was soldiers. An actual army. And if you don't have the money to pay your own soldiers, the last thing you want is an army showing up on your doorstep who's hungry. And that's what happened, is that the Western Crusaders came to Constantinople, expected a warm welcome, because they'd been invited, of course, 17 years too late, and sort of pillaged Constantinople, because they were hungry. And the Emperor of Constantinople of the Byzantine Empire did not want to feed them. So it led to riots. Riots and pillaging. So that's an inauspicious start to a crusade. Just put it plainly, it's an inauspicious start. Now, the rest of it is a matter of historical debate. And you have historians on both sides of this debate. Some who thinks that this was a horrible act of genocide by the Christians. You have other people who take a more charitable approach to the Crusaders. Okay, so it is very clear. Like, for example, Peter the Hermit. Peter the Hermit went to Rome to basically tell the papacy that Islam was doing horrible things to Christian pilgrims who are trying to reach the holy sites. And we also have to remember back then, too, that Christians did view the actual land of the Holy Land as holy. They viewed it as actually holy. So this was more than just sort of protecting pilgrims, even though that was a huge role of what they did. One of the major roles that Crusaders did was they actually were guards on the major highways. Okay, so not only were they protecting people who were traveling the highways, they also felt it was important to secure land that was holy out of the hands of infidels, basically the Muslims. Okay, so their view of this is that this land's holy. A lot of it was the place where these important biblical events took place. It should be in the hands of caretakers who are also considered holy. So you can't, in some ways, you cannot view this through modern eyes here, because we're not dealing with the same presuppositions that they're dealing with. They have their own presuppositions as they look at these issues. Now, was Peter the Hermit a liar? That's another historical question. Some historians say yes, some say no. And I think at the very minimum, Peter the Hermit exaggerated. He did exaggerate. However, in some ways, he didn't go far enough. Like the horrifying effects of the dhimmi, which would be imposed upon, Christians and Jews who wanted to stay within Islam. So, there were atrocities on both sides of this. It's not neither side is innocent here. Neither side is innocent. So this is always going to be a perpetual debate. But I also think that when you get into these matters of history, that it's not, you can't take one side. You can't take one side. Both sides had their issues. Both sides had their atrocities. Both sides are, doing bad things. But also both sides are doing some good too. no one here is completely in the right. No one here is completely in the wrong. It's going to come down to what's more the history of what happened. So as far as I'm going to touch it here, I don't think it's a great evil that a lot of people have made it out to be. On the other hand, too, it certainly wasn't completely justified either. It certainly wasn't justified a self-defense, especially not for the West. It had aspects of evil. There were aspects of evil, as I said, on both sides of this. And it's also going to depend on which crusade you're talking about, too. The character, for example, of the First Crusade is going to be very, very different than the Fourth Crusade. The Fourth Crusade, the Children's Crusade, wow, that was horrifyingly awful. That was so bad, it's not even funny. Where they sent children to fight. I mean, that was disgusting. Most of them died of starvation and malnutrition before they ever got there. And the rest that got there were immediately enslaved. Terrifying. Terrifying what happened during that crusade. So anyway, not to leave this on a down note, but yeah, there was some bad stuff that happened here on both sides of this. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I hope that provided a little light on this. Again, I think it'd be unfair to take a black or white approach to this, but we do need to evaluate this fairly within, say, the ethics of its own time. So thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it, and I hope that helped. Okay. Let's see here. Next super chat here is from Faye of the Duat for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Good to see you here tonight. From Fran Describes Hand, what is the process of making the papyrus paper and how long would it typically take? Ooh, great question. Okay. We kind of have to explain here the anatomy of the papyrus reed. Now, think of it this way. A papyrus reed has layers of pith. Okay? Basically, think of it like tree rings. Although it didn't, these didn't grow like a single ring per year like a tree, but think of it like tree rings. Okay? Running up and down the whole reed. Now, what they would do is when they harvested the papyrus, they'd chop off the fronds and just leave the stalks, because that's the important bit. That's what you want for the papyrus. And they would take that and they'd submerge it in water, and it would start to decompose under the water. And they would do this for about 3 days. They'd submerge it in water for about 3 days. And then they bring it out of the water and then slice it down one side. And then you could peel it apart. Pretty nifty. And then what they would do is they would lay these sort of sheets of pith in one direction, cover it with an adhesive, and then lay another crosswise over top. Then they would press it until it's sort of set, and then they would take the sheets out and they would dry for roughly about a month, 20 days to a month. And once those sheets dried, you had papyrus. You had one sheet of papyrus there that you could work on. So the process of making a sheet of papyrus typically takes about a month. And most of that's drying time. That is mostly drying time. So that's the process in a nutshell. I have seen it made. There's a lot. If you go to Egypt, a lot of these sort of papyrus shops, and what we mean by a papyrus shop is a place that sells paintings on papyrus. A lot of them will have as a tourist trap gimmick a demonstration of how papyrus is made. So they won't show the entire process, but you get a pretty good idea of how it works by the time they're done. And that's sort of to get you, ooh, interesting papyrus. I'll buy one of these overpriced paintings. Um, it's a marketing scheme. Marketing scheme. And a pretty good one, yeah, sure. See how this papyrus is made? Look at the quality. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat, and it's great to see you here tonight. Okay. And she says, and of course I'll buy one. Yeah. Let's see here. Yep, a lot of people do. A lot of people do. I never did. I never did. It just for me wasn't. It wasn't really worth it for me. I mean, I wasn't that fond of the paintings. Although some of the kind of glow in the dark ones were kind of cool. I'll have to admit. Oh yeah, they have. They'll use like glow in the dark paint on some of these. Which one?
If you're super careful, you can use rubber cement. Run it through an inkjet.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah. I have never done that. I've always been afraid that if I ran papyrus through a printer, that it would chip, because that's one of the problems with the papyrus. It's very brittle along the edges. So, yeah, I wouldn't recommend this, but you know, inkjet printers might be disposable enough that you could do this, but would not recommend it. Okay? Yeah, I'm not surprised. Yeah, I think you'd end up shipping a lot of sheets that way. You know, it amazes you how brittle this stuff is. I mean, papyrus is incredibly brittle, especially on the edges. You would have to, if you're going to run it through a printer, you'd have to use a printer that has a straight feed, so it can't bend. There can't be any turns as in the feed. Otherwise, you will jam the printer. Straight feed, you might get away with it. Yeah, that's what I was saying. You know, so yes, chipped a lot of sheets that way. Yep, not surprised. And yes, some printers have a flat feed that may work well. Yes, some indeed, but you're gonna have to cut that exactly to size. Okay, exactly to size. Super glue the edges of the papyrus. Doesn't really fix the brittle problem though, but you know, it might help.
And you break off the whole edge.
Yeah, you break off the whole edge, yeah. Alright, let's go to the next super chat here. Our next super chat here is from Addison Weir for $1.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. When you die, do you want to be mummified? No. No, I do not want to be mummified. Mummification is an awful process. Not for me. Not for me. No, I just want to be thrown on the ground and let to rot. That's what I want. To be very, very blunt, I just want to decay naturally. No mummification, please. Not my thing. Ugh. Yeah. Yeah, I don't want the brain scrambled either. Interestingly enough, that whole scrambling the brains doesn't look like it was all that well. The thinking on this has really changed, and there was an idea. I mean, Egyptologists used to have the idea that the Egyptians would scramble the brains and sort of drain it out of the nasal cavity when they mummified people. And that's what Faye is referring to here is I dib scrambling your brain. There's actually the thinking now in Egyptology is that they didn't actually do anything to the brain at all. They just sort of let it sort of decay in the skull. They have actually found some, having opened some of these skulls now, they have found that when the brain is mummified, when the body is mummified, the brain actually shrinks to a thin film. And so the thinking now is that most mummies did not have their brains removed, but instead it was just let to sort of dehydrate, collapse, and just sort of deflate. So yeah, it was an interesting thought because they weren't finding brains in a lot of these mummies, but they now know that they have just lame. She says, fine, I'll just fill the canopics. Okay, well, I'm still not volunteering to be mummified, so don't get your hopes up that you can have a slice of my organs, okay? Just saying. Okay. Okay, well, that was fun. Yeah, don't get your hopes up. And don't. Oh boy. Yeah, I agree with Jack right here. It did get weird pretty fast. All right, let's get back to the super chats here. Okay, our next super chat here is from Mask of Shy for I don't remember what this is, pen. But thank you very much for the super chat. No, catch up. Horus is disappointed. No, they did not have ketchup in Egypt. They didn't have tomatoes either. So that sort of rules out the ketchup. Ketchup has an interesting history all on its own. It has actually really interesting history. It was tomato based, and tomatoes are from the New World. Okay, so first of all, without New World exploration, you wouldn't have any ketchup, so there's no tomatoes. But there was also the whole idea that ketchup was a kind of preserve of a sauce that was supposed to be shelf stable, and there was a whole sort of ketchup war that happened to try to bring to people, consumers in the 19th century AD, this new shelf-stable sauce. And it really wasn't until the Heinz Company perfected the technique that they developed that stability. They knew that they could make a compo of tomato that was ketchup-like and would survive without refrigeration for, say, weeks. But they were looking for something that would last months to years without refrigeration. So it really was a race. It really was a race between companies in the 19th century to produce this shelf-stable sauce. So it has a very interesting history all of its own. Very interesting history. But no, the Egyptians didn't have ketchup. It's Peruvian? Okay, pen is Peruvian. Well, thank you very much for the super chat. We appreciate it, and we hope we provided a little bit of enlightenment on ketchup and Horus's disappointment over not having tomatoes or ketchup. Now, interestingly enough, you go to Egypt today, Tomatoes are in everything. You go to eat at almost any Egyptian restaurant today, and you'll get tomatoes in something. They're big on tomatoes. Whether it's a salad, green salad, they'll put in tomatoes, which you should not eat if you're a foreigner. They will stew okra with tomatoes. When they do a tangine with say boiled meat, there'll be tomatoes and cucumbers in it. So yeah, today they're all about tomatoes today. And I don't think Horace would be disappointed anymore that he doesn't have any tomatoes or ketchup, because you can get ketchup in Egypt now too. But back then, no, not so much. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat, very much appreciated, and fun question. Okay, the next super chat here is from Michael Gee for $20 New Zealand. Thank you very much for the super chat, very much appreciated. Last week, you kindly explained how the Genesis genealogies can be read to extend up to 50,000 years. I can get only to 9,000 years, excluding Terah and Noah. Can you provide sources so I can learn more? Well, I haven't done the math on this, so that was really the back of an envelope estimate that I did one point. So I'd have to really go through it again and see what I get out of it. But I do remember it was in the tens of thousands, so that much I remember. I'd have to go through the math on this and see what I could get out of it. So anyway, I'd have to defer this, but I do remember it was in the tens of thousands. So, especially once you take the Septuagint numbers in there. If you take the Septuagint numbers in there, it's going to be even longer. Yeah. Yeah, I started with the Septuagint numbers. The Septuagint numbers are a lot longer. I think they're probably more accurate. The text critical work seems to confirm that. But the actually tracing that out, I'd have to go and I'd have to sort through this and actually do the math myself. And I haven't, it's been a long time since I looked at this. I last looked at this something like 30 years ago. So I'd have to really go back and really look at this again. So anyway, I can't give you any more precise than that. But I will say this, that it does telescope to a lot longer than, say, the 3,000 years of, say, between, Abraham and the or not 3,000, 1,500 years or something like that. Yeah, but it's a lot. It can telescope to a lot longer than that. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. But I'd have to work on this a bit more to actually get you a precise number of how far it can extend. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Oh, sure, we could try it. We can do that possibly as a Monday video. Make a quick note of that. We'll take a look at that and we'll see if we can workshop that into something. Okay. So thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, the next one here is from Michael Gee again for $10 New Zealand. Thank you very much for the super chat. Genesis 5 and 11 genealogy in the Masoretic and Septuagint texts differ by 100 years at each generation. What's your view on which side, Masoretes or Septuagints, fiddled their data? I tend to think that the Masoretes fiddled their data a lot more. Now, the difference too is there's also a lot more time between, say, the Masoretic text and, say, the Septuagint. Scholars have typically agreed that the Septuagint dates to about the 3rd century BC. So most Bible scholars will take that view of the antiquity of the Septuagint. Whereas the Masoretic text, you're talking about an 8th to 10th century AD text. So you're talking here 1,000 years of difference between the Masoretes and the Septuagint. Now, one of the things we do understand too from the Dead Sea Scrolls is that the Masoretic readings tended to be more stable than those of, say, the Septuagint. However, when you compare, say, the Masoretic text and the Septuagint to, say, the Samaritan Pentateuch, I do tend from those readings to lean more towards the the Septuagint readings of the numbers in Genesis 5 and 11. Now, I might not do this in every case, because one of the things that I do tend to it's important to take every Old Testament text on a case-by-case basis. So I'm not going to take necessarily every verse in Genesis 11 as, say, the Septuagint reading. I'm going to compare each verse independently to, say, whatever traditions that are available for the Septuagint, the Masoretic text, and the Samaritan Pentateuch, and even the Dead Sea Scrolls, and I'm going to see what's going to make the most sense as far as each reading goes. And it's only from there that I'm going to actually make a decision as to what the number will going to be. So, I think overall, the Septuagint is more accurate to, say, the autographs. It's closer to the autographs. But then again, I'm basing this here on, say, its relationship to the Samaritan Pentateuch. But it also could be that some of the numbers in the Masoretic text are okay as well. So anyway, that's going to be the guiding principles I use when I do this text critical work. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I hope that helped and very much appreciate it. The Camilla Part for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Wanted to get a large prayer circle for my friend. She's been having trouble with low vitamin D and folic acids with high iron and white blood cell count. Okay. Well, the largest prayer circle I have is basically this channel and what we do on the Discord. We, bring each other's concerns in prayer on our Discord server. Now, yeah, Sully will be praying for her. We should get a new link out there too. He's opened the Discord back up. So we do need to get the new link out there. So do watch in the comment in the description. At some point we will put in a new invite for the Discord server, and we do cover each other's prayers there too. We bring each other's prayer concerns onto that Discord server. So we'll definitely keep her in prayer. Thank you for bringing this to our attention, and we definitely will raise her up in prayer. So thank you very much for the super chat, and thank you for the prayer request. Okay, the next one here is from Hodgepodge for $9.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. To what degree are we certain that Shishak the First and Shishak of the Bible are the same person? Almost 100%. We're almost 100% sure. We're that sure. Okay? And is this equivocation as pivotal to the synchronization of biblical and Egyptian chronology as purported? No. All right. So, let's get to the brass tacks of this. Let's answer the second one first. Is the equivocation as pivotal to the synchronization of biblical and Egyptian chronology as purported? Now, what this is saying in a nutshell is the synchronism that's been purported between the Bible and Egyptian chronology here pivotal to either one of these chronologies? And the answer is no. Each of these chronologies, the biblical and Egyptian chronology, would survive just fine if this synchronism never existed. Okay? It in no way pegs these chronologies at all. Okay? So, that supposed equivocation is vastly overstated. In fact, most Egyptian chronologists today don't even recognize it. They recognize it as a synchronism, but they don't use it for dating purposes. And in some respects, this is the false cause fallacy. Okay? Whenever Judy arrives at school, the school bell goes off. Therefore, Judy causes the school bell to go off. False cause. False cause. Judy is not causing the school bell to go off just by her arrival. It just happens that the school bell goes off when she arrives. Yeah. There's a correlation, not a causation. Likewise, this synchronism is not used under most schemes of Egyptian chronology. With that said, however, Egyptian chronology as a standalone chronology synchronizes quite well here. There's no question that the two events are highly correlated. Okay. So, we look at, say, the reign of Solomon, because remember Shishak, he's at the end of the reign of Solomon and at the beginning of the reigns of Jeroboam and Rehoboam. So you do have to find a Egyptian king that correlates to all those three persons. And there's really only one candidate for this, which is Shishak I. He's the only candidate. So it isn't just that the names are similar. It's that you got no other alternatives. It can't be Shishak II. Certainly it's not Shishak III. You really got one option here. At least only one that makes any sense chronologically. So knowing that you're dealing with only one option, that limits your choice. I mean, this should seem obvious. But for people who want to sort of rejigger the chronology, they're desperate here. They're grasping at straws to make some other connection like Shishak and Ramses' work, and it's nonsense. It's total nonsense. You have to destroy everything we know about Egyptian chronology. Throw out all the synchronisms. You have to throw out all the correlations between Egypt and Babylon, Egypt and Assyria, Egypt and the Hittite Empire, Egypt and Ugarit. You have to throw out all of that to make these imaginary chronologies work. Yeah, Jack Ray, choice A or choice A. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, that's really what we're talking about here. So, this is why, for example, this is why we're 100% sure. Yeah. Choice A or A. Yeah. So absolutely, we're pretty much 100% sure. And I don't think there's any reasonable doubt that they are not the same. Okay. Even the Bubastai portal of Shishak I, which talks about his expedition into Canaan. He's going up the coastal plain. He's cutting over across the Jezreel Valley into the Judean foothills, and he comes back down, and he almost hits Jerusalem, and then just as he enters into the territory of Judah, just before hitting Jerusalem, he just suddenly turns west. It's a he's going places where say Ramses never went. So I don't think there's any real serious consideration that Shishak is anybody else but Shishak the First. Now you're always going to get nut jobs that are going to claim otherwise, but no serious Egyptologist or historian is going to contest that Shishak isn't Shishak the First. Okay. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate it. Okay. The next one here is from the Camelo part for $2. Sponsoring question from the Bible Exegete above. So let me find that. Okay, and the Bible Exegete asks, how could Moses saving Pharaoh's daughter happen during Horemheb, since Exodus 1 takes place the building of Ramses before the episode? Okay, there's a literary consideration that we have to always talk about when we talk about Exodus 1. It's a literary amalgamation of many kings. Many, many, many kings. So when we look at, say, something like Exodus 1, okay, and I'm just going to pop this up here, which is we're going to go start here at verse 7 of Exodus 1. But the sons of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly and multiplied and became exceedingly mighty, so that the land was filled with them. Now a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. Joseph was in the second intermediate period, so this would probably be a new kingdom king. So dynasty 18. And he said to his people, behold, the people of the sons of Israel are more mighty and mightier than we. Come, let us deal with them wisely, lest they multiply, and in the event of war, they join themselves to those who hate us and fight against us and depart from the land. Now, that verse in chapter 10 happens at a very, very specific time in Egyptian history. That's going to happen during the reign of King Ai. At the beginning of, say, the Hittite-Egyptian War. So this is a long time after, say, the enslavement of the Israelites. Verse 11, so they appointed taskmasters over them to afflict the cities with hard labor. Okay. The enslavement of the Israelites happens at the beginning of Dynasty 18 under the king of Ahmose I. That's when the enslavement happens. And they built for Pharaoh storage cities, Pithom and Ramses. That happens during the reign of Ramses II. So what's happening here is we have many things happening at the same time and under different reigns of different kings. So what we have here in Exodus 1 is a literary prologue. It's a form of narrative. It's a form of the narrative genre, but it's a form of the narrative genre that is done in such a way that it takes several deeds of the Egyptian kings out of order and from various different reigns, and combines them into one literary unit. And this happens. This happens in all through Israelite literature. They do this frequently, where they will take, say, people who are, say, similar, may have the same name or the same title, and take bits and pieces out of there and combine them into one literary unit. So it's many people. It's many people being treated like a single gestalt that is then, for the sake of the simplicity of the text, is being treated like one person, even though it's not one person. This is why I kind of warn people when they start talking about the oppression Pharaoh. The oppression Pharaoh. They don't understand that when they use that term, the oppression Pharaoh, that's not a term that's used in the biblical text. That's a theological interpretation of the text. We always have to be careful here because of that tendency of Jewish writers to do amalgamations of this nature. Okay? So, when we get back to the question here, how could Moses' saving by Pharaoh's daughter happen during Horemheb, since Exodus 1 places the building of Ramses before this episode? The fact is, it isn't. Okay? But it's giving you the literary context of Exodus. So you are prepared when they are talking about this. Okay? So, what's happening during the reign of Horemheb is that the daughter of Ramses the First, while he's still general and vizier Ramses, is governor at Avaris. And as the daughter of a vizier, she has the almost uncontested right to adopt on her own initiative. She loses this right when Ramses I becomes King Ramses I. But up until that point, she's got the almost uncontested right to adopt. And that's what she does. Yeah. And frankly, here's the thing. Women had as I said, almost the uncontested right to adopt, even if their husbands didn't agree. You know, a husband could not contradict a wife's decision to adopt. She had an autonomous right here. So, when we look at this, it's only could take place because the only two kinds of women that could not adopt were slave women, because they did not have autonomy, and the daughters of kings, because they didn't have the right to introduce foreign members into the court because it was a security concern. So this only could take place if at the time she wasn't yet daughter of a king. But she becomes a daughter of a king later on, after she adopts Moses. And frankly, after he flees, to be honest. So, the text here is not really telling you that this episode took place before, but it's giving you a longitudinal picture. It's giving you the big picture here. The big picture of the overview of the plight of the Israelites from the time of Joseph up until the present time of the narrative, which happens to be during the building of Ramses and Pithom. So anyway, I hope that explains what's going on here. Thank you very much for the question, and I hope that sheds some light on this. That's a great question. And thank you for sponsoring that chat, question by the Camel Leopard here. We really do appreciate when our community sponsors other people's questions, because I think that brings diversity to the question and answer session, and also gives the opportunity for other people to get their questions in too. So really, really appreciate this, the Camel Leopard. Very much appreciate you sponsoring somebody else, and it shows great kindness to other people and generosity. So thank you so very much. Okay, our next super chat here is from Sentinel Apologetics for $10 Australian. Thank you very much. Good to see you here tonight, Rob. By the way, great live stream you had with Pine Creek. Very interesting. I watched the whole thing. Couldn't get enough of it. Excellent excellent conversation. That was really worth watching. I did post a link to it on my community chat, so if anyone wants to go and see it, highly recommend it. It was fantastic. Okay, and he asks, he says, blessings, David. Well, blessings to you too, Rob. Garrett on Exodus 15:22 says, Shur means wall, the sheer cliff face that dominates the northern edge of Aqaba region of Arabah, not the Bala Lakes or the frontier of Egypt. Oh, boy. Yikes. Garrett's wrong. But let's get into this. I mean, anyone someone starts trotting out the Gulf of Aqaba region, I get hives. It's just terrible, absolutely crazy crap. Okay, so here is why. Okay, so let's go down. All right. Okay. Now, we're not exactly sure where Shur is, except we are told about the Way of Shur. Okay? Now, this is interesting. Now, this is really, really important. This is not the first time we encounter Shur. There's another time we encounter Shur as well, and that tells us more of where it is than this. So I'm just going to look this one up quickly here, do my quick search. Yep. Okay. And the other place we find Shur is here in Genesis 16, verse 6. And this is the narrative of Hagar and Sarah. Verse 6. But Abraham said to Sarai, "Behold, your maid is in your power. Do to her what is good in your sight." So Sarah treated her harshly, and she fled from her presence. Now the angel of the Lord found her by the spring of water in the wilderness, in the spring on the way to Shur. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So they're up there. Abraham is basically, where is he? I think he's near Hebron at this time. I believe that's where he is. So Abraham's in Canaan at this point. Okay, he's not in Arabia. He's not in Midian. But Hagar flees. He takes flight. She picks up and leaves, and she flees the beating that she's getting from Sarai. And she's trying to make it back to Egypt. Okay? She's not going south. She's not going south. She's not going to Aqaba region of the Arabah. She is taking, the Way of Shur was basically one of two roads, major highways, that crossed the Sinai. You had the way of to the land of the Philistine, also in Egypt, called the Road of Horus, that ran across the northern Sinai along the Sinai coast. Okay, and it essentially went from Charu to the Philistine Pentapolis. Now, the Way of Shur was different. It went from Hebron, cut down across the middle of the Sinai, and worked its way across the Sinai Peninsula until it hit the wilderness of Zin on the outskirts of the Wadi Tumilat. Okay. It was basically sort of a highway that traders would use to go from the Judean foothills to, say, almost directly to Heliopolis. So that was sort of a quick path all the way to Heliopolis. And it was a very, very common trading route, especially with Bedouin and Ishmaelites. One of the reasons why it was so attractive to these traders, especially on the incense trade, was because there was no military forts on the Way of Shur. It was not heavily fortified. There'd be no extortion along the way. People could get their goods in and out of Egypt without being taxed. Now, the catch with the Way of Shur is after that spring, there was no water. There was no water. So traders who crossed the Sinai along the Way of Shur had to have with them enough water to survive at least 5 days. You could make it across there in 6 days. Okay, 6 days you can make the trip. It's not hard to make the trip in 6 days. But should there be a catastrophe or a disaster or someone gets hurt, you need to bring some extra water, just in case. And most traders who were trading along the way ashore knew this. So they knew it was an expedient way, they knew it wasn't a well-guarded way, but it was also a dangerous way. There were risks involved. Yeah, there's essentially a reason it wasn't well guarded. And you'd never take a large group of people across the way ashore. You just wouldn't do that. It was just really, really perilous. So I do think that there's an issue here when we start, take Garrett's use here of Exodus 15 to say that this is on the northern edge of the Aqaba region of the Araba. So I think that's deeply, deeply problematic, because we know that Shur is actually closer to Kadesh Barnea than it is to the Aqaba. So I don't see this as a viable reading by Garrett. And those are the reasons why. There's a long history of this route. This route is really well known in ancient history. It's a really well-known road. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I hope that answered the question. And where do you get these people? Thank you very much, Rob. Okay. Next one here is from Sentinel Apologetics again for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. In contrast, Eugene Commodore says Shur is east of the Balal Lakes, and I would agree. I'd agree. Was built to control Asiatic foreigners into Egypt in the tale of Sinuhe. Sinuhe flees Egypt, escaping from this point into Canaan. I would agree with all that. I think Eugene Carpenter here is dead on. Okay? Yeah, he's right. I mean, this is basically a choke point. It's a choke point. And it was east of the Bala Lakes. There is a little, as I said, it's sort of you have to go a little south of the Bala Lakes, but he's essentially correct here. He's essentially correct. And it was a route in and out of Egypt. And it was basically Sinuhe's choice to leave Egypt because it's one of two, as I said, one of two major roads, and it's the lesser guarded one. Sinuhe only has to make it past one Ketem fortress to escape the country, which is why he chooses this route. So I absolutely think Carpenter's correct here. So again, we have both biblical and extra-biblical evidence to show that Garrett's incorrect, and most likely Eugene Carpenter is correct here. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate it. Okay. Ooh, are we getting close to the end of the super chats? Very likely. Oh, we got another one here from Sentinel Apologetics for $10 Australian. Thank you very much for the super chat. For Genesis 5, see the 2007 Brill paper from Northcote, The Lifespans of the Patriarchs. He argues that Adam and Moses in the Masoretic text adds up to 12,600 years and could relate to the weird 1,260 days in Daniel. Yeah, very possible. Yeah, I mean, it's a addition of up to 12,600 years is not unreasonable, and it is a symbolic number. I mean, there is definitely a symbolism to that 12,600 years. So, you do get, and for the next step up, you get like 25,000. When you double that, 25,200 years, which you do find in some Egyptian literature as well. So I can definitely see where this is possible. So yeah, very interesting. Very, very interesting. I'll have to look up that paper. So anyway, Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Okay, our next super chat here is from Neurojack for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat, and it's good to see you here tonight. What in your study of Egypt made you a stronger Christian? Also, what do you see as the best authority on hermeneutics? Thanks for the streams. God bless. Well, thank you very much. I don't know what made me... I don't know if the study of Egypt made me a stronger Christian. The historicity, yeah. I mean, I did see that the historicity of Egypt, very, very much correlated to the history I saw in the Bible. So, absolutely, you see the names that have come over and over and over again. Place names, personal names. But, I think it was more, not so much... it was really more my approach to studying than it was the content of what I studied. Now, let me explain this. One of the things I decided when I went back to grad school was I was going to treat my education as an act of worship. My studying became an act of worship. It's still an act of worship for me. When I study something, I want to make sure that what I do is for the Lord. Martin Luther once said that he who picks up straw in faith is doing the work of God. So, and I took that very much that approach, which is, if I'm going to study something, when I do when I did my homework at grad school, I made that an act of worship. Every translation exercise I did became an act of worship. Every parsing of a noun or a verb became an act of worship. So when I started doing this, my mindset changed. The way I thought about school changed. It wasn't a dry academic exercise anymore. It was an act of training and worship to my Creator. And I think that habit is really what made me the stronger Christian. Not so much the content of my studies, but how I approached my studies. So I think for me, that made the greatest differences was that transformative mindset that every act I do in, whether I read a book, whether I, as I said, do a word study or whatever, each one of those acts transform my mind to make it more focused on God. I still do this. And I have to admit this. Sometimes when I go to church, I bring a script and I edit it in the church as an act of worship. It's a little different than prayer, but it is an act of worship. And I still do this, where I'm using my academic study to further my faith. And it kind of comes down to this, like the James passage. You say you have faith without works. I'll show you my faith by my works. Well, the analog to this would be, you say you have faith without scholarship. I'll show you my faith by my scholarship. So I think that mindset is very, very important in what you study. That can make the difference between a Christian who comes out of grad school stronger than ever versus one who is on the cusp of becoming an atheist because he's only experienced a spiritual desert. And grad school, whether it's seminary or secular college, can be a really, really dry experience if you don't have the right worship mindset. Yeah. If you turn the Bible into a homework assignment only, you're going to end up with some dreadful results. It begins with orthopraxis, right practice. If you have right practice towards your studies to begin with, you end up coming out with right belief. Not guaranteed, of course, but you're much, much more likely to come out with that. So that's what made the difference for me, is a different mindset going in. So I hope that answered that question. Now, what do you see as the best authority on hermeneutics? There's actually 2 books I really like for hermeneutics. And they're different, so I get these both. The Hermeneutical Spiral by Grant Osborne. Very, very good book on hermeneutics. Very, very good book on hermeneutics. I would highly recommend Grant Osborne's book on called The Hermeneutical Spiral. Fantastic book on hermeneutics. The other one is not necessarily related to hermeneutics, is not hermeneutics per se, but I think it's an important book if you're doing hermeneutics, which is Exegetical Fallacies by D.A. Carson. Very, very good book. These are both good books, and they're both worth having and both worth reading, and I think they're important if you want to do basically thorough Bible study. I'm not mean just Bible reading, I mean Bible study, where you're really sort of probing the text, you are really engaging the text on its full merits. So, anyway, okay, what book? I didn't hear the name. Okay, 2 books. The Hermeneutical Spiral by Grant Osborne and Exegetical Fallacies by D.A. Carson. So those are the 2 books. So anyway, I hope that helped. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate it. Okay, the Camelo part for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. What was Peter's father's name? Jonah, Matthew 16:17, or John in John 1:42? It's a great question. Let's look at the text. Let's see what they say. Pull up our Bible here. And the first one here is Matthew. Go right to Matthew here. And I might not be able to answer this here because I have never looked at this issue before, but we'll take a look and see if we can figure something out. Okay. Okay. Jesus said to him, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, because flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, but my Father who is in heaven." Okay. Now, interesting is Peter here has 2 names. He has 2 names. He's actually got 3 names, okay? He's called Simon, he's called Cephas, which is another name for rock, and Peter, which is why we tend to call him Simon Peter. Is there a possibility here? We have to be now open to the possibility. Was the name of his father kind of like his own name, where it was sort of a hyphenated name? So instead of just being Simon Peter, are we dealing with here a Jonah John kind of deal? It's possible. So we have to be very, very circumspect about this. Now, yeah, that's also another possibility my producer raised is he could have been called one thing and named one thing at birth and been called another. So Barionis is what it is in the Greek. So Barionis is in the Greek. So let's take a look at John here. John 1:42. John 1:42. And he says, he brought him to Jesus, and Jesus looked at him and said, "You are Simon, the son of John." Okay. Now, interesting. This is interesting because in the other verse, the Matthew verse, we have Barionis. Here we have Simon, son of Ionis. Okay. We have both the same names across the Greek texts. Here's what's going on. Now we know what's going on, because we've seen this in the Greek now is it's the same name. Jonah and John are the same name. It's just translated slightly different in the English. So what we have here is both. He is both called John and Jonas. It's the same name. Ionis in the Greek. So that's, again, here's one of the times when the original languages comes to save the day. And this is why I've always said to biblical exegetes of all stripes, you gotta know your ancient languages. If you're doing Old Testament, you gotta know your Hebrew. You're doing your New Testament, you gotta know your Greek. Because so many of these inconsistencies can be easily solved by just looking at the original language. In Matthew 16:17, it's Bar Ionis, son of Ionis. In John 1, he's called son of Ionis. So here we've got Uraeus instead of Bar. So it's using the Greek form of the word son. So Bar is the Hebrew for son. So Bar Ionis, son of Ionis, or son of Jonah, or son of John. Whereas here we got the Greek in John 1:42, Uraeus, and then you have Ionis. So that's the answer to the question. Jonah and John are the same name. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat, and I hope that helped. Okay, our next super chat here is from Sinal Apologetics for $5 Australian. Thank you very much for the super chat. Here, where do I get these people? Kip thinks I don't read enough. Winky face. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, that's so typical of him. But this is from Dwayne A. Garrett's 2014 commentary on Exodus for Kriegel Academic. Okay. Yeah, I think Garrett's wrong here. I mean, just it doesn't match up to any of the. Here's one of the things I find with some Exodus commentaries that has always kind of drove me nuts. They'll do fine with all the secondary literature of the Old Testament. Great, fantastic. You've got the secondary literature of the Old Testament sort of mastered. And frankly, there's a little dirty secret here when we talk about commentaries anyway. You know, sometimes people ask me why I've never written a commentary. And because a lot of these commentaries are just more or less based on pre-existing commentaries. They're really just sort of warming over the scholarship of previous commentaries. They're many of these commentaries aren't adding new scholarship to the mix. They're really just recycling the old stuff from the previous commentaries. So a lot of commentaries are based upon existing commentaries. By 2014, we have learned so much about ancient Egypt, about the context of Edom and early Canaan. This seems to be something that really isn't. So they've sequestered themselves in this Old Testament secondary literature world, where there's sort of no input from the outside. So they're not consulting ancient Egyptian texts, or say the archaeological reports. So I see a problem here with Garrett's work because of that sort of thing. Now, hopefully I'm not overgeneralizing this. I hope this is just specific to this particular case. I haven't read his commentary, but I also want to be very careful here not to overgeneralize. But with that said, I think Garrett would have done a lot better if he had, say, consulted some of the other primary sources, rather than just sticking to the secondary sources in his particular academic silo. And when you start getting siloed disciplines like this, yeah, things can kind of go off the rails. And I think that's what we saw here. So, as I said, this is something that's always driven me nuts about a lot of Exodus commentaries, is they're siloed within that Old Testament Torah studies, and just did not get beyond into, say, primary source of cognate cultures. And so that's a weakness I find in many commentaries. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Again, I hope I'm not doing Garrett injustice here or disservice. But I think in this particular case, that was a problem here. Okay, so next super chat is from Farmhouse Theologian for $20 Australian. Thank you very much for that super chat. He just says hello. Well, hello to you too. Thank you very much for that super chat. Very much appreciated. I didn't have a question, but please feel free anytime to ask a question. We love answering questions. That's why we do this, and we just really, really enjoy interacting with our community in this way. But we also appreciate the support too. Your support really matters to us. We earn a sizable amount of our income from these live streams, and it does keep food on our table, and that helps us to come back next week and do the same thing over again. So we do hope you're learning something here. We hope you're enjoying the live stream. We hope you're having a great time. I mean, we want to treat this kind of like a party. We love the atmosphere where people get excited and enjoy learning about the Bible. So anyway, thank you so much for that super chat. Really, really appreciate it, and hope you're having a great time. Okay, I think we're at the end of the super chats here, so I think we can go into some non-super chats here. Oh, yeah. How do we interpret compound deity names like Kothar, Va, Hasis, or Nikalawa Ibib? What are our options? Fused gods, fused names, fused epithets, or hypostases? A lot of that is going to depend upon what period you're in. Now, I can't speak to those particular deity names because I'm not familiar with those names or their contexts. Okay? But I can tell you how we would treat this in the Egyptian context because we find the same thing. Amun-Re is probably the great example where you have, say, a merger between Amun, the god of hiddenness, and Re, the sun god. So, how do we deal with this and interpret our options? Well, it's going to be a yes situation, annoying as that is. And it's not going to be a one answer covers it all. We get this all the time in Egyptian stuff because you can sometimes have three or four names of gods basically strung together as a single deity. Now, in the case of, for example, let's take Amun-Re, just as a great example, because you can find, for example, statues of the god Amun-Re as a single unified fused deity. Okay? Aspects of both cults are sort of squished together. But, and here's the rub. You've got also the, say, in the sacred bark of Amun-Re, there are two compartments in that bark. One with a statue of Re, one with a statue of Amun. In that case, it's being treated, the real flesh and bone of, or flesh and body of the god is treated as two separate deities. So, what do we make of this? That's it. That's it right there. That's it right there. My producer just nailed it. The Egyptians are very flexible. They are very, very flexible about this. They did not just see these gods as just one god. It's not just a corporate merger, okay? Where you have like two stores, you know, they're competing in the same space. You know, they're competing for the same customers, they're doing the same products. They maybe even have the same suppliers. And then they just decide one day, hey, you know, why are we competing each other? Why don't we join forces and merge as one company, and then we'll be one big, massive company taking all the market for ourselves? Well, there's a little bit of that involved. You know, in some cases, you know, that is what's happening. Sometimes one cult swallows up another cult to appropriate the rituals of that cult. We see this, for example, with Ptah, Sokar, Osiris. Okay, in the case of Ptah, Sokar, Osiris, we have the Osiris cult first swallowing up the Sokar cult to get that sort of corn mummy ritual into the Osiris cult, and then it swallows up the Ptah cult as well, because of the role of Ptah, not only as creator deity, but also as sort of a mummified god as well. So the worship of Ptah is in some ways very similar to the worship of Osiris. So in that case, the Osiris cult was a corporate raider. It was a corporate raider. It was gobbling up all the other cults that had anything that it thought was interesting to add to their own. So you have that as well. I mean, throughout the Egypt's history, Ptah had always been worshipped on its own. But in this particular case, you had this merger. So you might have an Egyptian who worships Ptah as a separate deity, and then worships Ptah, Sokar, Osiris as a composite deity. So in some cases, too, you're going to have hypostases as well. Like, for example, in the case of, say, Amun-Re, especially during the late period, there is, or not late period, beginning Dynasty 19 and into the late period, third intermediate period and late period, you start seeing hypostases of gods being used. They would call these forms. Keperu. Keperu is what the Egyptians would use. It's the same. It's the same as, say, the scarab beetle or the Keper beetle. Okay. In this particular case, Keperu can also mean, say, forms or manifestations of a deity. So Amun-Re would have many Keperu, manifesting as, say, Amun, as Re, as maybe some minor solar deities. So there isn't one answer to this question, because the reason, at least in Egypt, for creating composite deities there's many reasons, and they weren't always separate. Weren't always merged. Again, as I said, Amun-Re could be worshipped as a single god or as two different gods. He could have epithets, and he could have hypostases. And sometimes it was just sort of one cult eating up the other. So, I mean, just a lot of things. Religion in the ancient world is very, very complicated. It's very, very complicated. New merch, do Dr. Falk merch idea? Oh boy. I'm not sure we should go there. But we'll think about it. Keperu or Eru? Okay. So anyway, Petulia, I hope that answers your question, at least as far as I could from my particular perspective as an Egyptologist. But I would suspect that many of the same sort of principles would apply to the gods of Ugarit as well. So anyway, thank you for that interesting question. Oh boy. All right, well, we're going to take some. We're at the end of the super chats here, so we're going to take. We got a little more time here, so we're going to take a couple of non-super chats before calling it a night. One or two, okay. Because I do have to get up and go to work tomorrow, so we're not gonna be doing the 6-hour live stream. That's for sure. I'll take this one that came right after, though, the camel leopard. When did praying go from open arms to closed hands? The medieval period. Medieval period. This was sort of something that happened with monastic Christianity. Essentially, you basically had open arms being used as a form of prayer all through, say, the Second Temple period. Camel leopard, that's all right. 8 hours should be enough. No, definitely not. I'm reading off the live chat here as we go. Get back to the question, though. But yeah, open hands and open arms, and basically lying prostrate on the ground was really a normal way of doing prayer. So people would be stretched out, hands in front of them, legs behind them, on the ground praying. That was a normal way to pray during the Second Temple period. Okay, but what happened? How did this go to this? What happened was monasticism. And what happened was you started having contemplative quiet prayer. This also changed at the same time as reading styles changed as well. You know, people in the ancient world, when they read out loud. They didn't read quietly to themselves. So they would be reading and listening to what they read as they read it. But with the monastic movement and, say, more emphasis placed upon personal silence and quiet, less expressive forms of both reading and prayer took over. So it was no longer as acceptable to read out loud. Monks had to learn to start reading quietly, and it took centuries to do this. This wasn't an immediate change. But also, prayer itself changed from being something up high that was expressive, extroverted, to something that was much more introverted and personal and quiet, particularly the quiet bit. So, like that statement from Jared Gilmore. But how could you show how holy you are if you aren't lying flat on the ground in public? I love that comment. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that would certainly help. Yeah. You know, the Christ, you know, praying, you know, the whole idea of secret prayer. Secret, quiet prayer. Yeah. But this is not something that happened overnight. We have to understand that this was a process that took centuries to do. It took a long, long time to make that transition from basically extroverted, hands in the air kind of prayer to praying with your hands folded. Yeah, it took a long time, and it was a big cultural shift in the West, essentially. So anyway, I hope that answered your question to the camel part. It's an interesting question, but it does have a lot to do with with the monastic movement, and that's where it sort of originated from. Okay. So we'll take one more non-super chat, and that'll be probably our final non-super chat for the night. I might actually get to go to bed before midnight. Whoa, wouldn't that be something? Take the. I'll just make a comment to this. Melissa Butler. Okay. Because that's going to come up in just a moment here. Because I think there's an important point she makes that I think is well worth addressing. Because it's not quite what that seems. Not quite what that seems. Hopefully this will come up in just a second here. Come on. Waiting for StreamYard here to catch up here.
Did like StreamYard?
Oh, nice. Good. Okay. Melissa Butler, BC, yes. But didn't Daniel pray in private, so not entirely New Testament? That's a yes and a no. Now, he prayed in the privacy of his own room. But one of the things is that when Daniel prayed in private, especially at the beginning, during the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, when prayer was illegal to any god but Nebuchadnezzar, he opened the shutters of his room, and people could look in and see him praying. How would they know he was praying in there? Hands up! Yeah. That's how they knew. That's how they knew Daniel was praying. If you just shuttered the door, opened the shutters, and no one would know he was praying. But they would know he was praying because his hands were up in the air. That's how they knew. And he knows that's how they would find out when he opened the shutters. So while Daniel did pray in private, he also prayed in this customary style of the day. So it was actually a really great observation. I think your observation here of Daniel was fantastic, because it is something we need to reconcile. How do we reconcile that he prayed in private, but how do we also reconcile that everyone saw? It's just, but that's how they, and he knew that's what they would think. That's how they would figure it out. So it's a great comment. I thought this was a wonderful comment, and I thought it really adds to the conversation. Really adds to this conversation. So thank you very much for making this comment. It was a great comment. Okay, I'm gonna take one more super chat here, and then we'll probably call it one more non-super chat, and we'll probably call it a night if we don't get any more super chats. So we did take a fair number of
God catches this and pick him up.
Yeah. It's like God catches us and shouts, stick him up. Yeah, sort of. I'm just going to take a look here, see how much. Okay, it preserved this was preserved from the beginning. So no timeouts. Oh, I like this. All right. So I'm going to see if I can find one more interesting question. And if I don't find something here we like, we'll just call it a night. I'm not going to touch that one. Not tonight, anyway. I know what he means by that, but I don't think I can give a good answer to that really off the cuff. He's talking about dual powers. Okay. Actually, I think this is going to be an interesting question. Gaius Octavius, what does it mean for us to reign alongside Christ? And will that co-reign be eternal, or will it come to an end at some point? That's an interesting question. Because really, what we're talking about here is the reign of Christ on earth. Either the old earth, say during the millennial kingdom, or the new heavens and the new earth. And it doesn't strike me as it will come to an end at any point. But at the same time, too, I think we're also not dealing here with a static situation. Okay, we're not dealing with a static situation. So I think one of the things I think about when we talk about heaven, I think one of the problems that people have when we talk about heaven is that we think it's always going to be the same. It's a little, I think a concept of heaven is a little bit like the Vorlons in Babylon 5. They're stuck. They're frozen. Yes, they're always keeping the law, keeping order, but they're frozen in that order. I think sometimes we view heaven a bit like that, where not much is going on in heaven for all eternity. And we sort of graph that onto our conception of the new earth, too. There's really sort of, in some ways, two stages to heaven. Two stages to heaven. There's the disembodied state, where, say, the dead in Christ go to heaven, and they worship in front of the throne. But there's also going to be a new earth, where after people receive their new bodies, they go there to live. So we're talking two very different environments for, say, the afterlife. This infers that for the believer in Christ, there's going to be change. If anything, the sort of staticness of the afterlife is going to happen in, say, the other place, the bad place. In the bad place, nothing's going to change. It's going to be the same misery day in and day out. But in heaven, you're going to have constant change. You're going to have, you're going to have the opportunity to talk to whoever you want, who's up there with you. You're going to be talking to your friends. You're going to be talking to your loved ones who went to paradise. You're going to talk to the apostles, if you get the chance. Get to talk to historical figures. You're going to worship God. In the new earth, there's going to be building. And intellectual discussions, and even though our sort of our knowledge of Christ is going to be perfect in love, it's not going to be perfect in complete knowledge. We're going to keep discovering things about God throughout all eternity. mean, God is that vast and infinite. And he's so incredibly more than our minds can comprehend that it's going to take us an eternity to even just grasp the basics of God. It's going to be an exciting time and a dynamic time of change and exploration and discovery. Listening to music of all the ages, hearing new music that had never been created, listening to the music of the angels. It's one of the things that we hear in the Psalms is sing a new song unto the Lord. Not the same old music over and over and over again, but new songs, new music, new expressions, new art, new forms of beauty. All of it inspired by God himself. So given that radical society of change and development and growth without sin, without evil, without any of the negative side effects, it will also be constructive rulership with Christ, such that, when we co-reign with Christ, we're going to be reigning not as tyrants, but as Christ would himself. We would be organizing and enabling and uplifting people in their vast eternity. What a wonderful opportunity. It would be such an incredible thing to co-reign with Christ. Because at that point, you are helping in the next life unlock the potential of all eternity. How exciting. How wonderful. This should make all of us excited for heaven and the new earth, because that's what's going to look like. It's going to be absolutely phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. So, we got one more super chat here. Okay. Well, thank you very much for this question, and I hope that answers your question. I hope you found that interesting too. Okay. Okay, this is going to be the last one for the night here. We've got one more super chat here, and this is going to be the final one, and then we're going to call it a night. From Exegetical Apologetics for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Is there any correlation between the weighing of the heart ceremony and the hardening of hearts in the Bible? God bless you, folks. Well, God bless you also. Yes, there is a correlation. Now, the correlation here is that the Bible uses several words for hardening, and they're not all the same. One of those words is the word kavod, and that word means heavy. But there's other words for hardening of the heart too. There is one that actually does mean harden, but it uses, I think, 3 terms for it. I don't remember what the third one is off the top of my head, but the one in this particular case is kavod. It means heavy, weighty, burdened. It can also mean serious too. Serious in a good way. As he was a very, very serious, thoughtful person. Very kavod. Very kavod. But in this particular case, it's more weighed down. Weighed down. So, in the weighing of the heart ceremony, and this is found in the Book of the Dead. It's when the dead, the heart is, after the dead person has traveled through the terrors of the Amduat, the Duat, they sit before the throne of Osiris. And Anubis weighs the heart. He weighs the heart. On one set of the scales is the heart of the deceased. On the other half of the scales is the feather ma'at, which means balance, order, Vaguely justice, but that's very vaguely justice. But it means sort of balance. That's what it really means. So, if the heart is heavy and the scales tip down, so your heart is heavier than ma'at, than the balance, then you're in trouble. Then you're fed to Amit. Your heart's fed to Amit. Here, boy, here's a snack. Yeah, so in it, the idea in Egyptian culture was that a heart that's been weighed down by wrongdoing, by crimes against the gods, crimes against the king, nom nom. That is going to have a heaviness of the heart. Now, in the difference here in, say, Egyptian literature and mythology versus, say, the hardening of heart in the Bible, is that in Egyptian myth, magical spells can make your heart lighter. Your wrongdoing can be removed by magic spells. Okay, and that's what a lot of the spells in the Book of the Dead did. They were there to lighten the heart, so that didn't happen to you. But yeah, the two are very, very similar, at least in its, say, cultural underpinnings. Okay, so yes, the hardening of the heart, the kavod of the heart in the Bible, and, say, the weighing of the heart in, say, the Book of the Dead, are based upon similar cultural principles. So, although they're not, say, directly related, but the same cultural principles are under both of these. Okay? Yeah, so that's part of it, is we're called to keep a light heart. Keep your accounts short. Keep your accounts short with God. So with that said, that's going to be the end of our live stream tonight. I want to thank everyone who joined us tonight. I want to thank all the people who provided super chats and great questions. We love all the questions. So this was fantastic, and we so appreciate you joining us tonight. Also want to thank the Patreon supporters, because the Patreon supporters, they help us to keep our equipment up and maintained, and they basically keep things running smoothly here. We also want to thank our regular subscribers who watch our videos and leave comments, and also who also like and dislike. And also, if you haven't subscribed to this channel, please consider doing so you don't miss any of our content. And please click on the notification bell so you get all the updates as new content comes out. And with that said, I want to thank all of you for watching tonight. I'm really glad you could join us for this live stream, and I will see you next time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible. Good night, everyone.